welcome. I have been asked to discuss with you the innovation in public procurement. Innovation has been identified by the European Commission as being one of the main drivers for the growth of the future of Europe. If Europe does not offer an innovative, friendly market, all the creative outputs will go elsewhere. And we really have to avoid that. That's the message from Europe. When you look at the directive tells us one thing in recital 47, that innovation is a main driver for a sustainable, smart and inclusive growth of Europe. So you can see that from Europe, everything is pushing towards innovation. We look at Enterprise Ireland, and Enterprise Ireland are telling us that innovation means business. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my point today will be that innovation is business and that contracting authorities should more and more use the PCPs, and I will explain to you later on what that means, the PCP process, because PCP will drive innovation. But let's pause here for a moment. The talk today is about public procurement. And the basic of public procurement, it's a contracting authority that is actually going to purchase, an acting authority that is going to buy goods, services, works, and they will do that with public money. And the rules that apply on that is really what public procurement is about. Now you're going to ask me the question, how can a public body buy something that is not yet on the market? All of that, ladies and gentlemen, is the purpose of my talk. The new procedure, the very new procedure that Europe has built into the procurement directive is called innovation partnership. That's the new process that we have. We have had in the past the open procedure, the restricted procedure, we have had the competitive dialogue, and we now have innovation partnership. And what is it? Well, it's a procedure. It's a procedure that allows you as a contracting authority to purchase innovative products, services, works that are not yet available on the market. That's what it is. How does it work? Well, it's all worked out for you in Article 31 of the classic directive. Totally separate, entirely separate to the innovation partnership process is what is called the PCP, which is the pre-commercial procurement. Has nothing to do with the Public Procurement Directive, doesn't fall under Public Procurement Directive, actually doesn't fall under any statutory instrument at all. We come back to that. I think it is important that we need to understand that the innovation partnership process falls under the directive. The PCP does not fall under that directive. So we'll come back to that. Enterprise Ireland tells us that innovation means business. But what does that mean? What does that mean? To understand this very practical question, you need to understand the difference in between creativity and innovation. What is the difference between creativity and innovation? Well, creativity is often referred to as that elusive, very ill-defined phenomenon. But for the purpose of this exercise, creativity is all about ideas, new ideas, something new that we're going to test, research, and develop. That is what creativity is. Fundamental for a creativity are two things, is A, knowledge and understanding of the domain being investigated is one element, and then the willingness to question that knowledge and not to be constrained by it. So someone would say creativity is really the balance between knowledge and the ability to free oneself from that knowledge. On the other hand, we have innovation. Innovation is all about commercialization. It's all about the ideas, bringing it to the market, make sure that it's implemented, make sure that it is produced as such. So to qualify as an innovation, you have to have commercialization. Hence the fact that I say innovation is business. Take a few steps back. If I explain to you that my grandfather was a most formidable man, not only because he was a father, a very proud father, as I discussed with Sarah earlier when I took the lift, he had 14 kids, 7 boys and 7 girls in that order. That doesn't make him formidable. But he was known as a creative guru. He had loads of ideas. His cousin never had a light bulb moment in his life, but his cousin knew precisely how to market an idea. He knew precisely how to convert a thought into a practical use. What is the difference? My grandfather remained a happy man. His cousin became a multi-millionaire. That is the difference in between creativity and the innovation. Nowadays, people still talk about the Herbots racing pigeon formula. It's the winning formula for any person that wants to buy a racing pigeon. That is money. Innovation requires creativity, but not vice versa. The sequencing is important. It always starts with an idea, R&D, and then possibly the commercialization of it. If you look at Article 31.2, paragraph 2, it states it very nicely. I read, an innovation partnership shall be structured in successive phases following the sequence of steps of the innovation process, research and innovation. And that's the point I wanted to emphasize to you, is that whilst innovation is commercialization, innovation partnership is more. It is not limited to the marketing of the idea. Innovation partnership goes the whole process, from idea, from R&D, to possibly the commercialization of the idea. Later on, I will refer to it as it is not only phase 4, it's all the phases of the innovation process. Now, have a look at Article 31. What do we know about this new process? Because it's an interesting new process, and if we look at it, we will learn the first thing. It's a 2-step procedure. We know this very well, this 2-step procedure. It's a little bit like the restricted procedure, the competitive dialogue. We first pre-qualify candidates, and only those that pre-qualify will be then allowed to go forward to tender. That is a 2-step procedure. So innovation partnership, 2-step procedure. What is interesting is that if you look at Article 31.6, is that it says that the contracting authority shall apply selection criteria concerning the candidate's capacity of R&D and implementing of innovation solutions. We're using a new terminology in the directive. We're using capacity. If you look at Article 58, it refers to experience. Is this deliberate? We don't know. It will depend how it will be interpreted. 2-step procedure, how many candidates do you minimum have to have? The directive tells us 3. Next, we're told is that this innovation partnership is not operating in a vacuum. Not at all. Not at all. There is a certain requirement. First of all, the contracting authority must express its needs. Enterprise Ireland refers to it as the challenge. What is the challenge for the contracting authority? What is the need? What do they need to have that is not yet on the market? That needs to be articulated in a written document. You must define the minimum requirements of your solutions. What are the minimum requirements of your solutions? And the directive tells us it has to be very clear. You cannot be unclear in your requirements. you have to identify very clearly what the nature is and what the scope is of the required solution. The directive further tells us that you have to set out the procedure very clearly. What structure are you going to place? Are you going to go the whole way from idea to R&D to the commercialization? Or will you only do the commercialization? You need to specify what the structure is that you have chosen, how long it will take, and the value for each of those projects. That is important, because with an innovation partnership, you can pay the people as you go along. I say you can pay. I'm wrong. I should say you must pay, and you have to tell them in advance how much you're going to pay them for the various stages. As a contracting authority, you can stop at any stage. You can say, it's not going the way I like it, so I stop. Or you can say, well, there are too many candidates here, so I will eliminate them as the phases go forward. I can do that if I tell them in advance where I will cut the numbers of candidates or tenders. So the next step, which is important, is, because people of you might have used the competitive dialogue in the past and they might say, oh, this sounds all very familiar. It's not. You are not allowed to pick and mix. You are not allowed to take a bit of what candidate A says and what candidate B say and then create this new solution for your problem. You're not allowed to. Very clearly in Article 31(4) and Article 31(6), so they repeat it in the same article twice. You're not allowed to reveal confidential information. You're not allowed to share solution, except if there is an agreement. Again, some of you will remember from the past and say, that's fine. We are going to give a general waiver. And we're going to say whomever is actually tendering for this job accepts in advance that this information can be shared. Not anymore. Article 31 is very clear. No general waiver. And if you are entitled to use the information you gather from the process and you want to communicate that to the others, you have to have an explicit, specific entitlement to do so. I give you an example. In the Netherlands, they organized an innovative partnership because, as you know, the Netherlands is under the sea. Some would say it's a pity they are not under the sea, but that's the Belgian in me talking. But the Netherlands, the dikes are very important. And if a dike bursts, it can have catastrophic consequences. So the need of the contracting authority was, we want to know where the dike is weak in advance. And that went through the process. Company A said, we have a solution for you. We put kind of sensors everywhere in the dike, and that's communicated to a central unit so that we can see where the dike is weak. Company B says, no, none of that. We do it from the space, because from satellites we can photograph the dikes, and if there is a weakness, there's a different type of vibration, and that can be photographed. A contracting authority could not have said, gosh, those are two fantastic solutions. Now I want to merge them. They couldn't do that without the agreement. They had to go ahead with the two solutions. Now there could be more, but in my case, there are two. In the past, people were screaming because public procurement didn't allow the dialogue with the tenderers. It wasn't possible. And only in the Utilities Directive had we a possibility to negotiate. Well, in this case, we must negotiate. So those that want to talk can talk. In fact, they have to talk, save for the final stage. So the negotiation is required. And the negotiation is required to improve the tenders that are there. But remember, you cannot communicate what you have heard in the other room. Okay? You must negotiate, but you cannot negotiate the minimum requirements you have put in. You cannot negotiate the articulation of your needs that you had. You cannot negotiate the award criteria. All the rest you negotiate. very difficult. You now have to be very clear what your solution is. You have to be very clear what your functional specification is. Functional because what is it that you want to achieve? How are you going to evaluate one solution to another? I give you the example of the dike. How are you going to evaluate sensors versus satellite? All of that needs to be stated in advance. All of that needs to be very clear. So you cannot just go into a room and kind of wing it. It doesn't work. You need to actually have that discussion well thought through. And you will understand that that is very, very difficult because you have to all write it down. Next step is that you have to think of intellectual property rights. We're talking innovation after all. The directive tells us that when it comes to intellectual property rights, you must define, it's a must define the arrangements that you have put in place. What are you going to do? The directive doesn't tell you how you have to arrange it. It doesn't specify whether you can or cannot share the information. It's up to you, contracting authority. But we have recital 35, which says a contracting authority must retain the right to use the information they get. Okay, so that is important, that there's no point for a contracting authority to go forward if it cannot retain that information. A lot of work, an awful lot of work for you as a contracting authority to do. Add to that Article 84.4, which I call the fear index, which is your requirement as a contracting authority to specify and audit every decisions you have made. You have to edit all of that into a document. How have you decided what the market is? How have you decided what your solution, your solution's minimum requirements are? What have you decided? How will the negotiations take place? Will be at a meeting? Will be at a Zoom meeting? What have you decided? All that has to be minuted into a fear index, the procurement index. So a lot of work there for contracting authorities, and that's why the innovation partnership is not used a lot. But we have a solution. The directive tells us, can I remind you, in recital 47, it's not an article, it's a recital. There is this other driver you might think of. It's not required, it doesn't fall under the directive, it is not allowed if you use that other process to be used in order to commercialize the product, but you can think about it. And that is what is called the PCP that I discussed with you in the beginning, the pre-commercial procurement. And pre-commercial procurements have two benefits. First of all, it's not governed by the directive. And attached to that, the only thing you have to comply with is what is in the communication of the European Commission, which says if you comply with what's in this communication, we, the Commission, are not considered this payments that will be made of state aid. So that's quite beneficial. The only thing you have to do really is to comply with the principle of transparency and equality under the treaty. Very similar to the same principles under the directive. The second aspect is that the PCP must be based on R&D, not defined, R&D that are falling outside the directive but inside Article 14 of the directive, which means the R&D cannot be used exclusively for one contracting authority, cannot be exclusively for them, and secondly cannot be paid fully by the one contracting authority. You cannot therefore have a PCP for a need of Galway County Council. If you see that, that's in breach of Article 14. So therefore, sorry, not in breach of Article 14, it's in breach of the requirement for Article 14. So therefore you fall under the directive, and so therefore you can't do the PCP. The one thing to remember is, again, recital 35, which says fictitious sharing of the results between contracting authorities or purely symbolic participation of monies is not allowed. And if that happens, you fall under Article 14 and then therefore no PCP. The definition of an R&D is not in the directive, but if we go to the Military Procurement Directive, there is a definition, and they refer to the OECD Frascati Manual, which is essentially saying that an R&D is a creative work undertaking in a very systematic way to increase the stock of knowledge in order to use the stock of knowledge to devise a new application. That is what an R&D is. The communication says, of the EU Commission says, a PCP has 3 steps. Step 1, solution exploration. Step 2, the prototyping. And step 3, testing. The difficulty that I have is those 3 steps. If you go through all those steps, then a PCP finalist would have a great advantage of someone that will then go into the innovation partnership. Is that an issue? Well, contracting authorities have been very nervous about using the innovation partnership and the PCP because they feel that instinctively we're not talking about a level playing field. However, we cannot automatically exclude them because we have case law for that. And case law, a good Belgian case, Fabricom versus the Belgian state, where the Belgian state said, well, there is an act, a Belgian act that says you cannot use R&D. So someone that has been involved with R&D cannot be involved in the procurement process. The European Court has said that this was disproportionate and therefore not in accordance with public procurement law. So the idea here is you cannot automatically assume that such a reality is true. We then also have European Dynamics who have told us that if you are the incumbent tenderer, you have an automatic inherent advantage. But that doesn't make you automatically better or excluding to tender. No, that's not the case, says the Court of First Instance. But again, you can feel there is a tendency here. We see that the innovation partnership is not used the way it should be used to drive that European force forward. The PCPs are used, but not really considering the fact that they are not using it in order to commercialize the project because they are not allowed to commercialize the project. So we have a bit of a standstill period here. We have a bit of a discussion. My advice, my strong advice to contracting authorities is, look, it will take you a long time to draft properly your needs, to articulate them. It will take a lot of time to have your needs written down, to understand what really you are requiring. Because after all, we're talking about something that is not on the market yet. My advice, use the PCP for phase 1, which is explore your problem. Start analyzing what your market is. Be clear on all of that. And once you have done that, don't go further. Then you start your innovation partnership. But that means PCP stage 1, stop. Innovation partnership, start phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is really my advice for you. It will drive Europe forward. It will make sure that we have the innovation in our camp and that we, Europe, are going to do it right, and you, contracting authority, is not going to do it wrong. So that is my advice to you. If there's any further questions, I'd be more than delighted to answer those. Thank you.